Welcome to the Carnivore Cast, a podcast focused on the carnivore diet and lifestyle, with practical advice from successful carnivores, citizen scientists, and top researchers. I'm your host, Scott Meslinski, and I'm here to speak with experts and experienced carnivores to get answers to your biggest and meatiest questions while helping you live your best life as a carnivore. If you enjoy the show, please consider supporting the Carnivore Cast on Patreon. By becoming a patron, you'll help us reach more people and continue to create content on carnivore. There are also exclusive perks available, such as private Q&As, consultations with me, and more. Become a supporter at patreon.com/carnivorecast. Check the episode description for the link. Thank you, and I'll see you there. Raphael Sirtoli is the co-founder of the Nutrita App, a low-carb, keto, and carnivore search engine that's different than any other nutrition app. Raphi is also the founder of the popular nutrition science blog and podcast Break Nutrition. He has a Master's of Science in Molecular Biology from Staffordshire University, where he conducted experiments on the metabolism of breast cancer cells. He's a PhD candidate studying the metabolism of neuronal cells at the Behavioral and Molecular Lab in Braga, Portugal. Raphi loves open scientific debate, CrossFit, football, hiking, and cold water immersion. And I got the chance to meet Raphi at the Boulder Carnivore Conference earlier this year, and he's an extremely humble and friendly guy, and super glad to have you on the show today, Raphi.
Thank you so much, Scott. That was by far the best intro I've ever had so far.
Well, we aim to please, and really glad to have you here. It's all true. So you should be proud. But I'd love to start, Raphi, for listeners with just where did your original fascination with nutrition and science come from? Because it seems like you're extremely driven to dive into those topics, both through more traditional academic means as well as just personally and from more of an entrepreneurial mindset.
Right. So just before the podcast, we were chatting about my nonlinear track to get where I am today, which is, studying cells or rats and in order to get a better idea of their mental health or their metabolism, and of course how this relates to my primary interest in nutrition. I had a very let's say bumpy start where I didn't start out in the sciences. I actually did Italian and management, so what I call mafia studies, which is, a language in business. When that became boring to me, I decided to pivot into a scientific career. And nutrition really seemed to offer it all in terms of having lots of open questions, being very sort of a relatable topic for myself because, I grew up in a culture in the south of France where food was very important. And basically that allowed me to really to use science as a way of exploring the question of nutrition. And I quickly discovered that it related to so much, whether that's political even, but also, scientific and social and interpersonal. So it's really nutrition that brought me into the scientific arena. And, so I got there, however I could really by doing anything from, unpaid sort of office jobs in labs to now actually being a PhD candidate at a private lab in Portugal and doing my PhD over there.
Yeah, that's very cool. And how does evolution and evolutionary biology tie into this? Because I know that's a framework you often talk through or think about with some of these concepts.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think evolutionary biology for me is really, my view on it has been shaped by something that I think it was Richard Dawkins once said that, if you think of it sort of the potency of an idea having an explanatory ratio, meaning how much information is contained in your idea and how much can it explain with that. And he was using that explanation to sort of wake people up to the importance of evolutionary biology, which has an excellent explanatory ratio, meaning it's a theory that really predicts so much about the natural world that it's really is the most powerful idea in biology. And I think that it's a pity that in medicine and, even in just sort of standard lab work, work that you'd see done on metabolism in labs, I think there is not enough attention paid to that idea, and applying a sort of a lens of sorts of evolutionary biology on the questions and considerations that we may have about a particular topic. And I think that's dearly missing in hospitals, where we serve junk food, when we have debates about diet, about quantities of plants versus animals. I think that the evolutionary lens is really important, because it's sort of, it's like a bullshit meter in a sense. It won't give you the exact answer, but it'll give you an idea of whether the idea even has any merit at all to start with. And I think it's underused.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with that sentiment. And I love the book, The Selfish Gene by Richard Dawkins. I'd encourage everyone to read it. It's really very logically laid out, and some of the examples he gives around aggression and mating behaviors, and whether animals choose to fight, choose to hunt each other, is super interesting. And it just gives you a whole new way of thinking.
Absolutely. It was really influential on me. I don't actually read that many books on science, because I'm so, busy reading studies and blog posts about it. That's just how I sort of consume the information. But that was definitely a science book that influenced me in my appreciation for evolutionary biology, even though nutrition, I think, barely ever comes up in the book. It's just,
Yeah, that's a great point. And, what brought it to Nutrita for you? What is Nutrita, and why did you start it?
Nutrita is really my attempt of not only reading and writing, but doing something more consequential in terms of what I think can be achieved with what we already have in terms of knowledge and technology. And I got it's hard, because you will read about how the system in hospitals are broken, why doctors' education isn't great, why the knowledge on nutrition is full of contradictory information and propaganda. And you start learning about that, and either, if you care like I did, you'll either sort of get really pissed off and apathetic, or you'll be really pissed off and want to do something about it. And I chose the latter direction of trying to do something about it. And Nutrita is that attempt. It's content that we put out there with our team, and then we give people the tools, or we hope to, with our software apps. Really, those tools are to reach the health and performance goals that pretty much everyone has to some degree or other, whether explicit or not. But we either want to lose fat, not be depressed, just to be able to run a mile under 6 minutes or something, whatever it may be. We all have those goals, and it's often a good idea to take an explicit step towards achieving those, and not just having them, in the air, sort of floating there. I think it's our attempt for people to learn about concepts like nutrient density, the insulin index, understanding ketosis through a keto score that can sort of simplify things for people. Initially, with a simple 0 to 10 score, everybody can get that and sort of learn with it. So we're also trying to be the first app to popularize a carnivore diet. I think it's sorely not under discussed within the mainstream. So I hope that people will start seeing it as a viable option for people to eat that way.
Yeah, very cool. And just getting into a little practicality of how it works, you talked a little bit about some of the scores, nutrient score, keto score. I've checked it out and find that information really useful and interesting. And I've learned a lot just poking around, plugging in various foods. But can you talk about, just walk through an example of how someone would use it, picking a food, searching it, etc., and what they would find, and then what they do with that information?
Yeah. So let's take one of the most popular questions that people have once they have a reason to be on a diet and to think about their blood sugars or something like that. So take that person for different reasons who may care about these matters, how high their blood sugar goes, what increases it. It's actually not that straightforward to understand which foods will raise your blood sugar, in a sense. There are sort of these exceptions to the rule, and then you have contextual factors like food order and the time of day and your own personal makeup. So you have all these things that complicate the picture. But what we try to do with the score is try to weigh those factors according to the best scientific literature we can, come up with some sort of formula for it, and have foods scored consistently, across as many categories as we can, so that when you look up something super easy like an egg, and you want to know, is it going to be like conducive to being in ketosis? Is it going to allow me to stay in my ketogenic diet? You can get a 0 to 10 answer for that. 10 being very ketogenic, 0 being not ketogenic at all. So it's about taking some complex stuff, making it simple as can be, while still being accurate. And hopefully that's going to be a tool that for the person who doesn't know that much about the biochemistry of food, is going to give them the right direction to start walking in and start, buying the right stuff for their goal, which in this case would be being on a ketogenic diet.
Yeah, I really like that. And can you talk about how it would apply to someone on a carnivore diet? I mean, the skeptic would say something like, oh man, I'm just eating meat and animal products. How complicated can it be? But I see personally a lot of room for improving just a baseline carnivore diet through something like Nutrita. Can you talk about how someone would do that?
Yeah, so if you're on a carnivore diet and you would like to learn something about your food that's likely going to be relevant to your performance or how you feel, I would say that, yeah, it is straightforward. You can just eat a variety of animal foods. But let's say that you're an asthmatic and you're like, well, I'd really like to make sure my magnesium is spot on because, when you have asthma attacks, magnesium is used up in those inflammatory reactions. So you tend to have low serum levels, and it's good to maybe identify some foods even within a carnivore diet that are gonna give you a little more magnesium. It could be something as simple as that, right? We have a really complete nutrient density score you can use, or you may want to have an idea of sort of something like how it's going to stimulate your insulin, because you've heard that protein can have some insulinogenic effects, and you're worried maybe about your circulating levels of insulin because you've heard that's really important for overall health. So the insulin index is going to show you how it affects your insulin, taking account all of these contextual factors that we mentioned, and once again sort of give you a baseline understanding that for a given amount of insulin that you produce, having it come from animal foods is very different than when it comes from carbs. So you may get a similar extent of, insulin secretion, but there are actually important differences depending on the source. And it's quite hard to know all of that by heart. So that's why the score is going to summarize it for you with a simple label like moderate, bad, good, something to really make it clear that it fits or it doesn't fit within your choice.
Yeah, it's very actionable, and I like how you can just learn along the way through these small experiments, and it's not an overhaul, but really an education tool. A problem I have with a lot of diets is they just tell you what to do, and people want to know the what. They want to take action. But really the why is so critical, but it's boring and it takes a long time to learn. But when you have something like an app like Nutrita, you can sort of learn along the way while doing.
Yeah. And, look, I don't personally take out the app to select every single food because, I have that, because of my professional situation, the knowledge of sort of what to buy, and I have a good idea. But that doesn't mean that I'm not still going to learn things from it that are sort of interesting. And I didn't know that this food was particularly rich in this and that. And I might sort of understand how other people tend to think of nutrient density by looking at the differences between our apps and other apps, like, whether it's MyFitnessPal or other apps out there. They will penalize foods because of their fat content, because they're applying a very simplistic formula of density to a food to establish if it's nutritious or not. And we think there's more to it than that. You can't just sort of tally up the nutrients and say it's, that's over whatever many calories it is, and, that's your score. There's more to it than that. There's how fat affects metabolism, how that affects the use of those nutrients. There are all sorts of effects going on. So we think it's a useful thing to keep an eye on, just to understand how food is likely to affect you. I think there's a lot to learn from that, just generally, even if you don't need it to track your weight or something, for example.
Yeah. And shifting topics a little bit, Raphi, what motivates your interest in cancer research specifically?
Yeah, cancer is the disease which really taught me the most about human physiology, I would say. It's such a fundamental shift in the behavior of our cells that disease really is characteristic in that way, that it really forces you to take a step back and understand the big picture when it comes to how cells live and die. So that sort of was maybe the reason for my interest in cancer. And then I happened upon Thomas Seyfried's book, which is a sort of tour de force of the subject and a really impressive argument for the metabolic theory of cancer. So I did my master's thesis on breast cells that were either what we call transformed, so they were cancerous, or they were normal cells. And I would basically try to assess if they were what we call respiring or breathing normally, meaning using oxygen to combust with fat and have ATP produced. And it was such an interesting question to me. Were they actually like fermenting, or were they just breathing like normal cells do? Because this is a key question of the theory, whether all cancer cells do that or only some of them. And the literature was saying that, these breast cancer cells, the MCF7 cells, they're not fermenting. They're breathing normally. There's nothing really wrong with their metabolism. Hence, it's a falsification of the theory, and we should stick to a genetic view of cancer. So I chose those cells purposely because they were likely not to be fermentative, as Warburg would have predicted, the German researcher who initiated this whole line of thought. And it turned out that, at least according to my data, it was clearly a fermentative phenotype, meaning that there was a lot of lactate produced, and they seemed to be thriving very well in those conditions. So that's sort of where my interest in cancer goes. And I think it hopefully what people can take away from what I said is that it's worth trying to falsify ideas rather than trying to find support for your ideas, because it's sort of a basic scientific approach that I think is sort of underused nowadays. And so hopefully that's an important takeaway people can get from this. It would do everyone some good to try to falsify ideas a little more rather than just find support for our pre-existing bias.
Yeah, absolutely. Really interesting. And how does it tie into your work at Nutrita and Break, what you're learning about cancer and those studies?
So I'm not looking at it as closely as I did a couple of years ago for my master's thesis, but of course still very interested, and I'll read up on a study every once in a while. But I think the other big piece of the puzzle, that understanding that the disease is fermentative, is what you actually do in terms of treatments. And in the past few years, I think the advances we've had with the press pulse therapy that's being popularized by Dr. Dominic D'Agostino and Angela Poff and others, is that by hitting both glucose, so sugar, and glutamine, at different time points, sort of in a coordinated, repetitive manner over weeks and months, like you're pushing them down through a ketogenic diet and through some pharmacological means like a glutamine inhibitor. This is probably a powerful 1-2 punch for the majority of cancer cells. I think the data is really suggestive that at the very least, it's unlikely to be harmful to be on a state of nutritional ketosis. And we've got all this, human and rodent evidence now that this sort of double hit of suppressing glutamine, suppressing glucose is likely really going to help a lot of people who have cancer. So there are still a lot of people fighting back, saying that, look, you've got these papers showing that enzymes for ketolysis are being upregulated, and this is a sign that they're using ketones and fats. But I think there are a lot more steps that have to be proven to be able to support that argument yet. I think at at this moment, I'm actually pretty hopeful for cancer in terms of its potential to be eradicated in the near future, much more so than other diseases, to be frank.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I was listening to, I know this is completely out of context and you don't have the like scientific paper basis that this person was talking about. I just thought it was interesting because I follow a lot of the work of Dom D'Agostino and some of the things you've talked about on other podcasts regarding ketogenic diets, low carb diets, and how, carbohydrates can be like limiting carbohydrates can in some ways, I know I'm simplifying, starve cancer cells. But they were saying that down-regulating carbohydrates, yes, the cancer cells don't have, can't grow based on the carbs, but you're also down-regulating your antioxidants, if you're eating less fruit and things like that, which, we can argue about till the cows come home. But just saying like basically that there's a compensatory mechanism, in your body where lowering the carbs doesn't actually halt or limit cancer growth. It looks like it from a mechanistic standpoint, but you're just sort of shifting the burden over because you're also not supplying the adequate antioxidants. Have you heard of that theory?
So just to make sure I've understood it, is the idea that if you're subtracting glucose, but you're losing the benefits from like plant, like phytonutrients, basically.
Yeah, essentially.
Okay. Yeah, I think I've heard that idea in one form or another. Yeah, I think I have. It's not very convincing to me because, first of all, actually there are very few studies, but there are a few interesting studies showing that actually they gave people, I think it was they fed people a standard food with or without antioxidants, so really controlling for that variable. I'll send you the study so you can link to it in the show notes. And they showed there's really not much difference at all. So, when you give these isolated compounds, so if you take those nutrients and you actually try to control for their effect properly in a study, you actually tend to see it's either a wash, like nothing really changes, or it's negative, that we can see that antioxidants can blunt exercise adaptations. Actually, one of the strengths of cancer cells is their ability to buffer antioxidant action and not, die from it. So we have to be actually pretty careful what we do with those things. But I don't think there's any evidence that the antioxidants that you find in plants are going to have the effect that people think they have, simply because the metabolic changes that you have from subtracting glucose are really big effect sizes. They're major things. They're measurable many different ways. They're large effects we measure, in your RQ, in your subjective things like your appetite, things change really in a really big way. But if I remove or add antioxidants, you're not even going to be able to tell. I'm not going to see it in biomarkers much. Your subjective impression of it is not going to change much. It's really more of a question of, how the antioxidants get used and are they in the right amounts and what do you need for cancer. So I think it's a bit of a simplistic argument. And I think there's a very high level of certainty that removing glucose from your diet when you have a cancer that is highly fermentative, and glucose is one of those substrates, there's much more evidence for that than to worry about a lack of antioxidants.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's just something that I had heard sort of very offhand, not scientifically, in a podcast, and was curious to get your take on.
It's not a stupid idea, by the way. It's just that it's not really what we see when we study a couple of questions about it. But it's not a stupid question. It sort of makes sense why people would wonder that.
Yeah. And Raphi, what does your diet look like now? What does kind of a day of eating look like, if you want to start there?
So I eat pretty much a carnivore, and I've been eating that way mostly for the past close to a year now, a little less than a year. And it's something like a ribeye, some smoked salmon, some eggs. I really love all of the weird bits in the offal and stuff. So that could be heart, could be liver, could be kidneys. Could even be something like cow balls that I bought and cooked the other day, because here in Spain they love all sorts of like offal and stuff like that. So I saw those in the shop and I asked the guy, like, what are these? And he just pointed to his pants basically and said, okay, gotcha. So yeah, I'll have one. They're pretty big actually. Like they'll fit in the palm of your hand, your open hand. So wow. They're actually quite impressive. So I thought, okay, let's so I asked the butcher, like, how'd you fry them up? Like, how'd you cook them? And he said, just fry them up, You can just do it in the pan really, really easy. And they're really delicate. Like I'm sure you could serve these at any fancy dinner, and they look like little pieces of pate basically. Like their taste is not strong at all. It's not like kidney or liver that sort of overwhelms most people who try it. This is like really delicate and sort of like shrimp, I guess. Something is like not too different. So I have all of these things in rotation. I eat cheese as well. So I'm born in France and have I think it's probably in my blood somewhere where I need to eat some cheese. So a lot of raw, full fat cheese if I can. The smellier the better. I love those strong. I don't know if you've ever tried this cheese, Scott, but there's this one from Corsica, so a little island off the south of France. And it's a biological weapon. It's ridiculous. It looks terrible. It looks like snot. And there are pieces which are chunky and other pieces which are just like basically milky liquid. And you just like take a spoon of it and you'll first of all, when you open it up, like you literally could not bring it in a plane. Like I'm being serious. Like you would not bring it in a plane. You'd be like kicked off or something.
Wow.
And even when it's like triple wrapped and everything, sometimes the smell gets through. So, and anyways, so you open it up, you have a little spoon of it or something. People often have it with a piece of bread, but of course I'm just gonna take it straight with a spoon. And it'll start. It's like those candies, like that maybe you had when you were a kid that sort of pop and fizzle on your tongue.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's literally like that. Like it sort of just lights up your
wow.
tongue, and it's so like strong and
cheese. That's weird.
Yeah, it's just the power of bacterial fermentation. Like they just produce some interesting chemicals. And yeah, it's I mean, look, if you're interested in probiotics, like fuck the probiotics. Just go for that smelly cheese.
Yeah.
You'll get a ton of biotic density there.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And I'm curious, do you track macros on carnivore? It sounds like you're eating a lot of organs, but do you pay attention to things like fat to protein ratios, fasting windows, electrolytes, things like that?
Yeah, so I don't have some hard numbers in terms of my macros, but I think when I've checked the couple of times I'm usually between I would say like 70 to 80% fat.
Wow, that's pretty fatty.
Yeah. And I mean, look, people will watch me and they'll be like, wow, you eat a ton of protein, but they I don't know, they might also miss the fact that I order, if I'm at a restaurant and you order what you can, I'm like, could I have 4 big pats of butter, please? And the waiter looks at you sort of weird. I'm like, yeah, because if I don't have that, it's too lean and I'm not gonna be able to eat as much as I need. And I'm a relatively lean guy, I'm around like 9-10% body fat, so I can't really eat something that's too lean. First of all, it doesn't taste as good. That's personally. And second of all, I just naturally gravitate towards either if it's a nice steak that's not trimmed and has a ton of fat on it, usually that's enough. Like that's pretty much like the natural fat content tends to balance out for me exactly as I want it. But since most meats are like, trimmed to the bone, basically, you have to add a little fat back for someone in my situation with my sort of energy needs and body fat levels and things like that. But that can vary quite a bit. On a meal-to-meal basis, there probably is a lot of variation there.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And how about other things around like fasting? How many meals do you have a day? Do you have a certain fasting window or tend towards certain meal times, or how do you think about that?
Yeah, so before it was carnivore, I did no breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Then I switched to breakfast and late lunch, sort of middle afternoon. And now, as I'm carnivore recently, it's been pretty much breakfast and then eat whenever I get home from work. So that might be any time from like 5 to 9 or something.
Got it. Sounds very flexible.
Yeah, it's for me, it's the easiest way to do things. Just wake up, eat, and finish work out, and eat and sleep.
Too simple. And how about sort of supplements and electrolytes? I know you're doing these CrossFit workouts that are kind of long and tough. Do you supplement at all? Either anything like creatine or electrolyte powders, or do you just kind of salt your food?
I salt my food, and that's pretty much it. I still do every once in a while, but I have no even good reason for why I'm doing it exactly. But I sometimes take, I think it's like 100 milligram potassium citrate capsule, and I think I take about, if I have the pot there, I'll just like have 3 a day throughout the meals, so about 300 milligrams. And I'd have a bit of magnesium too, and that's it really. But I won't do that for a month. I'll just salt my food most of the time. So I don't really feel there's such a difference in terms of my electrolyte status. What has really changed is my water intake. So I think that's the most. So first of all, a couple of years back, I started, after I'd read the argument by Tim Noakes that you don't really need to be drinking all that much. I thought, okay, let's try it out. So I stopped drinking when I would go for a long run or work out at the gym or something. And actually most of the time we drink, but we don't need to. And I noticed, of course, that after a big meal with lots of meat, I'm thirstier. And otherwise, throughout the rest of the day, I don't sip on a bottle anymore. I just, drink, and that's it. So I don't know, my water intake and handling has changed. That's pretty interesting because it's a daily thing, a big daily thing that changes.
Yeah. That's huge. And even if you're doing like a late afternoon CrossFit workout, you haven't eaten since the morning, you don't add any salt or anything like that, and you feel all right?
Yeah. Usually I'll be at work, before 9, and I won't have lunch or really taken much of a break during the day. Then I'll go to the CrossFit box and warm up in 10 minutes and get going. That's pretty much it. But so sometimes I don't know, if I'm like, okay, I'm going to run this thing that I'm going to run this hill, and I usually do it in this much time, and tomorrow I'm going to try to PR it. I might add some salt or something. But I can't say like it makes an obvious difference for me. I think it probably would for people who had maybe not a really good salt status. But if your salt status is on point, there's not much reason to believe it's going to do much beyond the placebo.
Right.
But you can, a good combination is caffeine, like 10 grams of dextrose or something, and a bit of salt. Like that can be a good like pre-workout shake.
Yeah, sort of a targeted ketogenic diet style.
Yeah, you could do it that way. I think that's totally fine. I recommended it to a few like CrossFit guys, and they found it to be effective. It's pretty simple. All of these things have lots of studies like behind them. It has nothing to do with glycogen repletion, by the way, the added sugar, like even just a small amount, the 10 grams. I think it's really for the CNS effects, like it's an ergogenic aid, sort of like caffeine. So I think it's more about that than anything to do with like metabolism or glycogen.
And it's anti-catabolic as well, right?
Yeah, I don't know how much of a difference it's going to make with 10 grams because you're probably not going to spike insulin that much. Actually, that's a good question. I don't know how it would pan out in the sort of bodybuilding context, but for the CrossFit sort of intense intense type of workout context, it's probably going to have a bigger effect, I would guess.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And what has carnivore taught you, Raphi? You know, you're coming from this nutrition background. Probably a lot of what you've seen in your nutrition research, I don't know, probably supports low carbohydrate diets or ketogenic diets, but has carnivore made you question anything that you've seen from your research, or what has it taught you personally?
It's really been, I think, like a litmus test of just how good a thinker you have to be around these subjects, because it's really been it's been a long time coming, in a sense. If you look at it through the scientific literature, like in the start of the 20th century, there was the first and only controlled experiment on 2 carnivores, Stephenson and the other guy I can't remember. That was at Bellevue Hospital in New York.
Yeah.
And so it's got this long history, but what it's taught me is really that, you know, however crazy an idea may seem, you really have to take it on its merits. And it's really hard to do when there are so many crazy ideas. And I think in a sense, I think there's a luck factor, because I could have, you know, not been exposed to it for whatever reason, like most people aren't. Carnivore is not that popular yet. But I think it's really, you know, showed me just how far we are from a basic, like, model 101 of nutrition. Like, this field of science is so far behind. It's neighboring fields like whatever, chemistry or physics or other stuff like that. Like, the biological sort of field of nutrition is just so far back. And it sort of had to make me reconsider just how the sort of questions as researchers and as doctors that we should be asking ourselves. Because a few years ago, it could have been, like, we have to change the guidelines and we have to do these changes and, whatever, let's leave fiber in there. Let's not worry about that, because although it's wrong, it's not that important and it's not probably a problem. But I think we have to reconsider a lot of our priorities in nutrition. And I think you sort of have to have a reset where a lot of the old dogmas have to die. And, many people have heard the quote, but, or I'm just going to paraphrase it, but people have to, basically the old guard has to die off before the ideas can leave the field. So I don't know, it's sort of, in the sense, it's exciting because there's a lot to discover, but on the other hand, it's really depressing to see how much we've missed this past century.
Yeah, it's amazing how long some of these things take to change.
Yeah.
And Raphi, I'm going to poke fun at you a little bit here.
Please.
For someone who's so evidence-based and really scientific, why CrossFit? I mean, it's kind of the laughing stock of the evidence-based fitness industry. People talk about, like, just look at the injury forum of CrossFit.com, or like talk to the millions of people who have thrown out their back trying to do a clean and snatch, or, at the end of a 30 or 40 minute WOD where they're completely metabolically exhausted, they think it's a good idea to get under a heavy front squat or try to deadlift something and do these explosive movements. What draws you to CrossFit, and why do you keep doing it?
That's a great question, actually. I think it's, so personally, the reason why I keep doing CrossFit, for one reason, I think just for my own mental health, to be perfectly honest, the sort of the intensity that's central to the sport is a really important factor in how I feel day to day, moment to moment. So that's what it is currently for me. And the other reason is that wherever I go, whether it's Portugal, Spain, France, the US, I can be sort of away from home, but you get to the CrossFit box and it's this culture that it's a very distinctive culture,
Yep.
Unlike the average gym. And you have this real sense of community that is sort of why it's so cool, but also why it's so fun to make fun of it, right? Because come on, every culture is ridiculous when you look at it in a certain way, right? It's a sort of approach to exercise that I really like, because people, sort of high five, don't sort of check themselves out in the mirror, even though a lot of us go shirtless there, of course, when you work out. But there's no culture, there's none of this sort of narcissistic stuff, and you can't really. It sort of equalizes everyone, because whether you're like a ripped, like 85 kilo dude, like snatching like a crazy guy, or you're a pregnant woman who's there just taking it, quote, easy, everyone is going to find the CrossFit workout hard. And that puts everyone on the same level. So like everyone's suffering during the workout, and everyone's pretty much encouraging themselves if it's a proper, like, a CrossFit box. So that's sort of the other reason. Why it drew me was sort of random. I was just looking for a better gym than what I was used to. And CrossFit had this cool equipment, and, they were basically quite distinct in that sense. And I didn't even start out with CrossFit classes. I just went there, did my own thing in free access, and just, sort of was like, okay, I'll try out a class. And and then I stayed for the reasons I've just given. So the community and the intensity. And then there's the whole question that you raised about injuries and poor form. And I think all those, so there's truth to those points, but there are some specifics that aren't. So the truth is that a lot of people do CrossFit poorly, and a lot of people coach CrossFit poorly. I think that's unfortunate, but it's true. They don't teach proper progression. And they're basically, some of the gyms don't manage to, how can I say this? They market the intensity. That's why people come. But at the same time, you can't just like hit people with that day in and day out. Like, you can't really have a normal life and go to work and take care of kids if you're doing 6 CrossFit workouts a week like you're supposed to do them.
Right.
Like, it's a massive investment, because you have to learn proper technique. And most, I don't know about most, but a lot of boxes can't give that to you. And it's not even like the fault of the CrossFit as a model. I think it's the fact that, people don't have to really learn much in order to be coaches. Now, CrossFit is a bit of an exception to that, because if you look at their classes, like a lot of their coaching classes, they're actually really, really strict on form. And I think people confuse the sport of CrossFit, where you're looking at someone trying to give it their all. They're like on the brink of collapse, versus like what you do in practice, which is more controlled. You'll have strict movements, not just skipping ones. You'll have a very different approach. So I really wouldn't blame CrossFit as the model for the injuries. I think it's inevitable. And if you actually look at a lot of the stats, like people who just jog, they're injured all the time. They're injured as much as CrossFitters. It's just the reasons are different. One is because, okay, they might be pushing themselves a little hard, and the coach might not be making them progress properly, and they're not like speaking up in class and saying, can I have a lighter weight or something, as you should do, right, when you're doing a progression. So I think there's that as well. It's look, I met a lot of the people from CrossFit in Madison, Wisconsin this year for the games and the health conference. And, they were really, really interesting group of people. I mean, they're the sort of people who, understand low carb, understand a lot of the bullshit propaganda and the big food and big pharma. They're fighting it. Like, they care. Like, everyone knows CrossFit for the sport of CrossFit and for that sort of stuff. But the people actually working there and who founded the company, they are genuinely pissed off about what's going on in the medical system. So we share a really important thing in common. And I think that's something people should take in, because we're going to need to make a lot of allies to fight back against the bullshit we're being fed by a lot of the corrupt institutes in medicine, in the world of nutrition, and in the food industry. So, this is no joke. Like, we need companies like CrossFit CrossFit who are massive to actually give a shit. And they do. They're one of the few ones. So if for nothing else, I think they should be at least respected for that. But yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I largely agree with what you said. I mean, I'll even admit I did CrossFit for a summer and I loved it. For a lot of the reasons you talk about, you know, I think there's great camaraderie. It's really positive attitude in most of the gyms, people pushing each other, people being productive, helping each other out. Everyone's trying to improve and get better at their own pace. And it is really an effective way to get a quick workout in. And, you know, I certainly won't deny that there's probably a huge spectrum of quality with regards to things like form and technique and, safety, across, you know, gyms and trainers. So, people just have to be smart.
Yeah. And look, I mean, personally, CrossFit is great, but I kind of see it as a garage. Like I just go there. If I have like an injury I'm working on, I can use all of the stuff there to fix myself, because a lot of the physios I had I had poor experiences with a lot of physios who didn't really know what they were doing. But I'll use the CrossFit like gym equipment and all that and work on my own stuff. But I'll also take a lot of fundamentals from like Coach Summer, who is the ex-US gymnastics team coach. And they have a lot of sound principles people can apply. So I just apply those things for injury prevention, and I apply them in CrossFit, like proper form, you know, straight arm strength, not just compound movements. So I think we just have to like pick and choose from everything, right? So if you go to a CrossFit gym and you see that the coach just like sucks, right? It's going to happen sometimes. Well, okay, you could just not go. That's fine. There are tons of other cool things you could do. But if you do go, then maybe, you know, try to actually see what CrossFit HQ puts out in terms of the videos, like they're on their channel, and they show great form in the movements. So if you hold yourself to the standard that they're showing you, you actually see, oh, damn, that workout's way, way harder when I do it right. And, I think people have to sort of like take responsibility for how they do things. Because sometimes the coaches are good, sometimes they suck, but you know, in the end, we make the decision to go or not. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. That can be said about just about anything. People can take a set of instructions and make it horrible. And Raphi, what's something you're working on personally or professionally that you're looking forward to in the near future or over the next few months?
Let's see. So I'm collaborating on some papers with Mickey Bendor, which did you have him on already on your podcast?
I haven't had him on, but I heard him speak in Boulder and absolutely loved his talk.
Yeah, so we're collaborating on some papers there. So it's fun for me because I get to talk about a couple different areas. That's how I like to approach nutrition. So whether it's the paleoanthropological evidence or some evidence regarding the genetics or metabolism or even artifacts, you know, found at the sites. I think there's going to be some work we're going to do on those aspects to make our argument and publish some papers about what the human diet probably looked like, I think in the far past. So I'm working on that, and otherwise there's everything we're doing with Nutrita. So I was talking about Nutrita before, but I didn't want to give the impression it's my solo project. We're a team. I have a co-founder. We have another PhD writer on the team. We have engineers. So it's a really fun atmosphere to be in and sort of bring a few more tools forward. So we have a macro calculator. We have, Nutrita Pro that's coming out. I think it's basically the end of this week. It should be out. So hopefully people can play around with that and I hope it gets some discussions going. You know, I want to know what people think of the scores, and a big thing is always, you know, seeking to improve what we've already built. So my personal favorite is working on the nutrient density score, because that requires a sort of a way wider rather than deep type of knowledge to it, because there's so many different factors that go into understanding if something is nutritious or not, like, you know, bioavailability and, you know, effective metabolism and use versus intake of nutrients. So there are all these factors we're constantly refining, and I'd love to have feedback from everyone, whether it's, you know, carnivores or low carbers, paleo, vegetarians. Everyone's going to bring their bias, but also hopefully a few good ideas to the table. So yeah, I'll be working on improving that.
Yeah, that's great. I'm looking forward to that. And really appreciate you coming on today, Raphi. It's been great chatting with you and hearing you're very thoughtful about a lot of these topics. And you have this very eclectic mix of interests, which you do a good job tying together, which I really appreciate and I think listeners will find fascinating. Where can people find out more about you? And I'll provide links in the show notes at carnivorecast.com.
Thanks, Scott. That's really kind of you to say. People can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. So Twitter, I'm at Raphael with a PHS7. And on Instagram, I think I'm Raphael711. And on Facebook, they can just type in my name. I should come up. Cool. So, just check out Nutrita.app, our website, and you can, read up on our content. We have a carnivore guide that I wrote with Amber O'Hearn. So she's fantastic, and we had a lot of fun writing that. So we have an updated version people can go check out, and just watch out for our emails if you want to sign up to the app and get some early bird discounts. And I'd love to hear your feedback on it. Hopefully, the first carnivore friendly app won't upset too many carnivores if my scores don't please them.
Yeah. Well, thanks again, Raphi. Really appreciate your time.
Thanks, Scott.
If you enjoy the show, please consider supporting the Carnivore Cast on Patreon. By becoming a patron, you'll help us reach more people and continue to create content on carnivore. There are also exclusive perks available, such as private Q&As, consultations with me, and more. Become a supporter at patreon.com/carnivorecast. Check the episode description for the link. Thank you, and I'll see you there. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Carnivore Cast. If you enjoyed this episode, please review on iTunes. It really helps us out. And share it with a friend. What questions would you like answered? Or who would you like to hear from in the carnivore research community? You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Carnivore Cast, or go to carnivorecast.com. You can also email me at info@carnivorecast.com. I'd love to hear from you. Until next time, keep it carnivore.